Love you, Linda. Love you.
The courthouse the other day in the hallway, you're singing "Oh Happy Day."
One word prayer. Justice, where are you?
And Justice Served TV is on the air. Linda
Yes.
Kenny Bodden, how are you?
Hi, I'm realizing my cords are showing.
Well,
I
what
know
else
in
is new?
TV you're not supposed to have your cords showing.
It's such a weird day. It just feels weird.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Is it Friday? It feels like a weekend?
I
Partly
feel like
because
I
of
was freed. I feel like I was freed.
like the holiday yesterday was kind of weird. I'm glad we were able to sort of take a break.
And
I
then
did do
today,
the.
Can I just tell you something?
Yes.
Today in New Jersey is a holiday because that's what was the confusion initially. Remember about the Thursday and the Friday, because some states are celebrating Juneteenth the day after the federal holiday. Like New Jersey is celebrating it today. So you had the federal holiday yesterday, but the courts were closed today and all.
So what, to give people a longer weekend, or
I don't know
what's the
answer.
point?
I don't know the answer. I think it's just the way they do it. They do it the day after, and it's kind of strange, you know.
Yeah.
And good for the celebration. That's all I can say.
Yeah. I blame the unions.
Freedom.
I blame the unions. Have the holiday and then go back, get your butt back to work. I was in the bank today and they're like, "Oh, it was just weird. The day went by so fast." And said, you're working in a bank, banker's hours. So enjoy your day off. But yesterday I did post kind of the composite video that I gathered just prior to the verdict and then after it, all those reacts. So you had a chance to take a look at that.
Right.
An attempt to kind of capture the feel of all of that, the culmination of all of that activity, which was very interesting.
I called it the immersive. I renamed it. Okay.
Did you rename it?
And I added to it. I call it the immersive video because I was tweeting it to everybody and I was sending it, messaging it to everyone to watch. It was 25 minutes, and you just, when you got into it, you just felt like you were there. And then at the very end, when Dina takes
grabs the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, here's the deal. Everybody's rushing to Nathan Reed, Karen's brother. And I, of course, am late on the draw, and I see it happening. So I go, and so I get the perfect position, the back of his head. And so I start to take the mic, and she just grabs it and pulls it around the front. She's been kind of his escort, for lack of a better term. She's been squiring him around. So she was very helpful and gave us a shout out afterwards when we were talking.
Yeah, and then she talked about how we were the first ones to give her a voice, give them a voice. We were when the mainstream media was not giving them a voice, we gave them a voice. You were responsible for that, and I say that all the time. When you walked into the registry of deeds in the basement there and found that group, and that rainy, cold day, and I remember them looking at you like,
Well, and you say, "Hi, how you doing?" With Justice Served TV and blank stares. And then she was the first to speak up. And once she broke that ice, everybody was happy to chime in. So.
Yeah, shout out to Bittersweet's new member. Welcome, Bittersweets.
Nice.
I think you're going to like this community. 7 Texas said Vinny Politan gave a big shout to JSTV on one of his tangent videos. And last night, Aiden Carney gave a big shout out to Justice Served TV, although I have to laugh. I have lost my identity, Michael. And he said, and Michael Bryant and Linda. I could never get.
No, he got the Kenny part, Linda Kenny, and then he got.
It was stuck on Baden, and then he says, "This is the best part." He says, her husband's that famous forensic guy for JFK, assassination." And I'm like, okay, now I've lost my identity twice. I don't have a full name, and I'm just the wife of my husband.
The wife of.
But it was a really sweet shout out. He was really sweet about it. I actually watched his show last night. He went for 5 hours.
It's unbelievable what he's able to do. Unending energy.
And I had to laugh at some of the parts. I had to laugh.
Some of it. I saw that clip you sent me where he's going off on Hank Brennan. I mean, it's not something you're going to play in church, but but it was pretty vivid, pretty honest, and brutal.
And then he went off. He probably turned it off. He went off on the McAlberts, "Sue me." And he said, look at this interview where I said they were this, and now I said they were that, and I said they were this. Look, "Sue me. Where is it? Is the suit in the mail? You've been saved for 2.5 hours." And he went off. You think my rants are bad? My mini rants? This was
It's nuclear. It's a nuclear rant.
Linda,
So-
you know, who we post because we love her name. Of course, it was fabulous. Best video yet. That's talking about your video. And also, Linda, again, thank you for the donation. You had a great
Yes, thank you,
connection
Linda.
with everybody on the ground there. Thank you very much. Now, we have a very special guest tonight, Michael Bryant.
Yes, we do. And this is going to be very interesting in light of some of the jurors who have come forward. As I mentioned earlier, a little promo I did for our members. You know, it seems like, is the ink even dry on the verdict slip? I mean, either of the verdict slips, I mean, they just popped up. So we have a little video we're stealing from TMZ, who interviewed Justin, right? Justin?
Jason, juror number 4.
Jason. And of course, the prolific Paula Prado, the Brazilian attorney. She's been everywhere. I mean,
great, and she's been everywhere because she said that she wants to make sure there's pressure on the DA. And then, of course, you have people that are saying that they should call ICE on her. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, okay? And we don't know who started that one, okay?
I can imagine.
And then there's apparently, and then we had the alternate that the Petro did, and
we think
posted,
we don't know.
Well, he wouldn't have posted it because it had everything. It was as strong as combining both juror number 4 and juror number 11, Paula, together. And then apparently there's been another juror number 12 also has just given an interview to a Boston station at 5 and 6, and we haven't seen it. But we have a lot of things to talk about with the person who said, when we said last Friday, it was a week ago last Friday, just at this time.
Really?
Okay, wow. A week ago, when we said to him, to the best trial consultant in the United States and probably the world, Richard Gabriel, there he is. And he said, what do you think? And he went, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, Tuesday. And that's exactly what happened. Tuesday we heard from them, and Wednesday we heard from them with the verdict. Right on target, Richard Gabriel. I don't know how you do
it. Well, you spin the big wheel. You also think, what do jurors do in these situations? I mean, it is, and I think one of the interesting parts was that second guess that they did too. Remember that last little, they were about to come out with a verdict.
We do, we don't. Yeah. Yeah.
That always gives everybody a heart attack, of course. When you
Have you seen that? Have you seen that before?
No, I've not seen the exact thing where we have a verdict and then hold on. But I've seen lots of reluctance and confusion over the verdicts and things like that. So that's sometimes that's not unusual, but the kind of we do, now we don't is definitely something that gives both sides a lot of heartburn.
Yeah, I know Alan Jackson did an interview with Howie Carr, and he specifically was asked about, and he's never seen that ever before. And I know the juror, one of the two that has spoken, tried to explain how that happened. It was still a little unclear to me how anything like that could happen. Here's our verdict. It's here. Put it in the envelope. Here you go. And then the envelope's basically in the hallway on the way to Judge Cannoni. And whoa, time out. And then the one they then replaced the first with was virtually identical anyway. There was no change. Right. So somebody was having second thoughts or just wanted to make sure it was registered properly.
Well, I mean, this goes to how hard they work. I mean, the jurors are sitting there going, they know the world's watching. They know there's tremendous pressure on them, and everybody's kind of got the microscope on them and stuff. They obviously took some real time. They took 22 hours to go through this, to go through deliberations and stuff. And, that tells me it is an evidence-driven thing. They obviously, the jurors that have spoken so far have talked a lot about, hey, they spent a lot of time on that car. They spent a lot of time on that taillight because they clearly did not find it. But they did exactly what jurors are supposed to do, which is, can we make sense of this? Can we piece this together and stuff? And they just couldn't make it work. And oftentimes what sometimes happens, if they're doing their best, is, as we saw, there were some jurors who were like, there's some actual innocence jurors on this jury, and there's also some people who they didn't prove it. And that's what we got. We got, sort of this combination. And for those they didn't prove it jurors, there may have been a last little kind of vestige of concern about, wait a minute, I have one question about this one piece of evidence. Hold on here. So I'm thinking that's one of the things. Look, they just want to get it right. So they're just trying to figure out if we're going to be delivering this verdict here, because they know they're probably going to be setting her free, but they're also saying to the victim's family, sorry, you're not going to get the justice that you want here today. So they really want to make sure that they're literally crossing their T's and dotting their I's and making sure that they in themselves are fully convinced of this verdict.
So Linda again said sloppy job, said one juror. Bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk, for those who may have missed Michael Easter, the expert who did not get to testify in this case. We spoke to him last week. He's going to come back on Monday now with kind of a retrospective when you consider some of the jurors who made it very clear that they thought the investigation was sloppy at the very least. So we'll get his take on Monday at 6. He'll join us. What we thought we'd do, Richard, is I've stolen a couple of these interviews. Just play some snips of them to get your specific reactions. And of course, we're now calling into question my abilities to get this run up here properly. Stand by.
By the way, as you're doing that, Michael just announced a surprise guest that Michael Easter is returning as an exclusive to Justice Served TV on Monday, coming on after the verdict. He said he would talk to us again. His interview was amazing. So that was the big announcement.
Oh, is that a big announcement? I just blew that out. Sorry. I got to go to the production meetings. Okay, so let me see if I can
come out later.
This is TMZ and my buddy Harvey. Harvey and I used to work together when I was at Extra. I did a segment on Extra called Celebrity Justice, which they spun off into a show. I opted not to go there, but to stay at Extra. And now Harvey is the TMZ expert. So good for him. All I can say is he and I have different values. That's why I couldn't work with him. But I can't discount checkbook journalism because he's definitely made it work. Okay, let's see if I can get this going here. Stand by. Okay, hold on.
I mean, I can only speak for myself. I think that she was innocent. It's hard to tell exactly what people think deep down. There was a lot of things thrown at us, of evidence. So it's hard to tell what truly.
So you say in your head she was innocent. Does that mean you think she was framed by people inside that house?
It doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to John. Really, I was only presented a limited scope of what happened at the night, and I could only base my opinion off of the evidence that was shown in the courtroom. So I don't really know if there was a cover-up or not. I know that's the big conspiracy about it, but I don't really know. All I know is that there was a lot of holes in the investigation.
Okay, so I think that's a very smart analysis. Richard, what do you think about how this guy clearly was not going down that conspiracy rabbit hole?
Right. I mean, the reason that I really, from what I've seen from the jurors, I really have a great respect for what they are. One of the challenges that you have, especially when you're on either side, is whether jurors are actually going to hold the prosecution to a burden of proof here. Because we see in some cases, sometimes the prosecution can throw things together, they make a circumstantial case, and they sort of focus on letting the jurors create their own story. And this jury kind of went, wait, is there actual evidence of this? Or there's still holes? And they really found, I can't do it. So they didn't go down a lot of rabbit holes. They didn't make up a whole bunch of things. Clearly, some of them said, yeah, you know what? I think something happened inside that house to explain that. Because the truth is, that's a natural tendency of jurors to be able to say, God, if she didn't do it, what did happen here? And so I think a lot of people said, boy, I think something happened in that house. And they found it strange that two of the participants, some of the residents of the house, weren't called to testify. So I think that probably rose a little bit of suspicion in those jurors' minds. But fundamentally, they were not going to go in some great conspiracy. They did what jurors are supposed to do, which is, did the prosecution prove the case? And they said, no, I didn't do it. They didn't do it.
Yeah, smart distinction they made.
Yeah.
This must be research gold for you, because we're going to have a lot more coming up here, Richard, and to see how these jurors thought. I know when we've worked together, you taught me that's especially in the very difficult case, that's what you're looking for, is that one juror who stands up and says, and I actually, it's indelibly ingrained in my mind. I don't think I'm telling secrets out of school at this point, that when we did the focus group for Phil, there was a middle-aged Black male who stood up as they were getting all tumbled about, the prosecution proving it and all that kind of stuff. And he stood up and he said, to everybody, and I'll never forget this, our job is not to figure out what happened. Our job is to decide whether the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I teach that all the time. And that happened under your tutelage and I'll remember, his face is ingrained in my mind, Richard.
Yeah. And it's really hard for jurors because they always want to figure out what happened. Sure. I mean, we are wired for stories. So we always want to figure out what actually did happen. So it's actually counterintuitive for a lot of jurors to be able to fulfill this role of, did they actually connect the dots to make the evidence show that? Did they actually prove the case? Even if, and it's really uncomfortable for jurors to finally go, I don't know what happened, but I can't find a verdict of guilty if I still have those remaining questions. I was just actually addressing the Washington criminal defense lawyers this last week and stuff. And, the equation here, the ability of jurors in a defense case to say, hey, sometimes you have to take a look at what your questions are, and questions can be doubt. And if you have so many questions, that can equal reasonable doubt, because the truth is, what is reasonable doubt? If you have a doubt, I mean, we don't really have unreasonable doubts because they're all reasonable to us. We've got a doubt about something. So as long as the defense is doing their job and raising these questions and the jurors can't answer those questions, usually that leads to the reasonable doubt.
That's right, because my doubt, or Michael Bryan's doubt, or your doubt to us is reasonable. It may not be reasonable to somebody else, but it's reasonable to us. And then when you start attacking us in the jury room, wait a second, you're attacking what I believe. I mean, I can see that, so you got to be very respectful. By the way, Linda, again, thank you again for your donation. You've been a pleasure. Thank you. Well, we try to bring you the best of the guests, and this is one of the best. I mean, of the guests. What else you got for him? Because I know we have so many questions.
Let's see what else we got.
What you've heard.
Let's cue up the next one and see what we got here.
It's just hard to tell, though, because whether or not we think that there was malicious intent, we were only presented with the facts that they didn't go into the house. So, there's an example of reasonable doubt. So, like, there's other examples of reasonable doubt. So even if you want to completely buy into the theory or not, that wasn't what we were tasked with. We were tasked with finding, convicting, or deciding on this person's fate based on the proof and the evidence that the Commonwealth was able to present. And there was a lot of holes in the investigation.
He said that more than once. He said that many times, that all these holes in the investigation. But I wonder, I'd love to have been in that jury room, and if I had a nickel for every time I've said that, I'd have a lot of nickels. But you wonder what was that thought process like? What was how was that playing out? He's distilled it into a very simple. That wasn't our job to figure out what happened. There were reasonable doubts, but of 12 people, some people were not as clear thinking on that issue, right?
Right.
How do you put this? Where would you put this guy? I characterize folks as being alpha male type or female, wolves and sheep. And there's certainly a spectrum, right, in between. Everybody might have a little of each. This guy seems like almost like a sheep in wolf's clothing. I mean, he seems pretty mild mannered, and yet he seems pretty convicted in what he was thinking.
I mean, we sometimes think about it that way too, but there is a lot of gray area and people in the middle there. I'd put him in the middle. He's not what I would call a fact leader. You have a woman who's an attorney. It's always going to be an opinion.
Damn attorneys, watch out! Yeah,
watch out for those lawyers.
Can you imagine Linda in a jury room? I mean,
the shy, demure.
People are going to come out bloody. They're going to be bloodied.
Yes, not opinionated at all. No, I mean, it's you always look for who's your leadership on the cancel. I mean, clearly Paula Prado is right there. I mean, I don't know whether she wasn't the foreperson though, because the judge.
We haven't heard from the foreperson yet.
Yeah. We haven't heard from them. I'd be very interested to do that too. And four persons sometimes usually follow two ones. One is they can be really authoritative and kind of dominate the way that the deliberations go. But there's also what I call more facilitator for people, for persons, in which they just sort of go, I'm not here to direct anybody. I just want to make sure everybody gets heard. And they sort of just facilitate the conversation. And that's usually, that's always good. That's typically good for obviously a unanimous verdict, because what they're trying to do is make sure that everybody's heard. And from what I've heard from these jurors so far, most jurors said it was a really respectful process. They listened to each other. They had disagreements about things. They kind of worked through that stuff, and they ultimately came to a verdict in the case.
Michael, what else do you have? Let's talk about some other things that,
Yeah,
that
let's
he
see what else
said,
he
'cause
got.
I want to
And I
also
don't
get
have
to
these.
Prado and-
I'm just kind of going through them in the order they came up. So I do remember he talked about the judge's recommendation. Remember the whole thing about the not to take a straw vote, which she had incorporated into her pre-deliberation instructions in almost a formal way, which I thought was odd. And you know, Linda, we've talked to a number of folks. They all think it's odd. I've never, you know, once they get in that room to deliberate, you know, short of breaking the law, they should be doing whatever the hell they want to do. But the court gave them some direction, which was interesting. So we'll get to that.
Well, Bob Bianchi, who was on a major trial attorney, was the prosecutor in a major county in New Jersey for a number of years. He thought by the judge telling them not to take a straw vote and to take their time, that she was kind of directing them to. He thought that she invaded their province of how to go about. Richard, I don't know how you feel about that.
It's usually that is usually not the order of things. Usually, it's the jury gets to do whatever they want. I think she's concerned about another hung jury. And I think sometimes if you just take a straw vote and sometimes the jurors vote in a particular way, and then somehow somebody has second guesses, it's a quick verdict. And then all of a sudden it's read in court and a juror goes, wait a minute, that's not what I meant, and stuff like that. I think she was a little concerned. Look, I want you guys to make sure that the verdict that you turn in is exactly what you mean, because obviously she just didn't want to have to deal with what happened in the first trial, that mess.
So, Richard, did she waste the 2.5 days of their time with that stupid, is my words, stupid verdict sheet, and then had to change it to be exactly what the defense had recommended, to have guilty, not guilty, go to the next charge, guilty, not guilty, go to the next charge?
It's just, sometimes these convoluted verdict sheets are just so crazy. And, one of my big gripes all the time is that we wait till the very end of the trial, and then we don't give jurors essentially what the verdict form is going to be at the beginning of the trial. So they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be listening for to make their ultimate decision there. And then once they're sort of so loaded up with all that case information over weeks of trial, then all of a sudden you're trying to give them all these jury instructions, and you're giving them this long, complicated verdict form. And they oftentimes can't process that. It's just too much for them. And so I think, yes, I think it made it more complicated. You don't need complicated at that point.
And, as we know, the defense, well, I'm assuming both sides were mistreated equally. Nobody got the verdict slip until Yannetti had asked for it. They were basically on the verge of deliberation, if not already started. And it was almost like, oh yeah, okay, here you go. Almost as if she didn't want to reveal that it was the same screwed up form as the last time. And I think, as to the correction, the version 2 that came out, which I'm sure, set the jury back a little bit, right? Because then they had to figure out, okay, what does this new one say? I think somebody talked to her. Maybe a couple people talked to her and said, Bev, hun, you got to look at this. Look what happened last time. Look what it appears to be happening again. And I understand you're not wanting to cave into the defense. Maybe it make you look weak in their eyes or something. And they didn't go quite as far as the defense had wanted. They wanted a nice little column. Not guilty, guilty. Not, crazy idea. So she came up with this weird, if-then proposition flowchart, which was still better than it was, but not nearly as simple as it could have been.
Yeah, it makes it very challenging. And I sometimes wonder about this. And a quick story again, going back to the Phil Spector case. I mean, remember in that case, Linda, the jury indicated that they were hung.
They said they were hung, right?
They were hung. They were almost split evenly right down the middle.
And he held that. He held that. He got that note from them, and the day before at 3 something, and he held it and didn't tell us the next day because he had worked out his own solution that he was going to recharge the jury, if you recall, on some cockamamie theory that if Phil was happening to hold the gun and there was an earthquake happening and it went off, he'd still be guilty, right?
It was crazy. It was crazy stuff, and actually wanted to charge the jury with a new cause of action that the prosecution hadn't even tried in the case.
Right.
And so, and then I think he then talked to some other judges, and they went, "Well, you're going to get a mistrial if you do that and stuff." So he rescinded that, and then he did that cockamamie instruction about if it falls out of his hand and goes off.
That is so. I mean, talk about jury instructions being rife for reversal. If there had been a conviction
the jury
and
was indicated, or they were almost 50-50 split, which was a huge win, and that was against Alan Jackson. And it was a shock. I heard Alan and I talked about it when I went back to the second trial to watch a little bit of the closings. It was a bit of a shock. But it was cockamamie. And remember, he wanted us to reclose on the theory, and we refused to close on that. We refused to have a second closing. Well, if you're not doing it, I'm going to do it, and you won't have a closing. Fine. Don't, we wouldn't participate in it. So,
no, I mean, sometimes the judges, when they, I think they try to follow certain guidelines, but sometimes they make stuff up. And then I think very often they're not looking at what helps the jury make the simplest decision here. I mean, that really should be the focus here, is what will help this jury come to a verdict in this case.
Exactly. And as we know that, in this case, Karen Reed case, the defense also offered the OUI as an indicted charge, and as it turns out, and that's the one question I definitely want to talk to Alan Jackson about when we get him on, and I would never suggest we're getting him on, but when we do talk to him, I want to hear about that thought process, because as it turns out, they look like geniuses, but it could have resulted in another hung jury mistrial.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'll be interested to hear what he says about that as well.
So let's see what else we got here from.
Let's see what else Jason has
From Juror.
Can't wait to get it.
11.
Get to Paul, and while you're getting that out, but just before you go, I just want to say the jury that DePetro interviewed, who was an alternate, by the way, because somebody put it in our chat, talked about how ridiculous Judson Welsh's Blue Man Tube group thing was. Couldn't believe he was seeing that in the courtroom. So hop on that when you listen to Jason talk.
Well, one thing that I think that compels me is we did a lot of review of the tapes, and it seemed to me that the videos that we could see from the car after the alleged incident happened, that when we could see the taillight, it was lit up red where it shouldn't just have been red. So that leaves to me a conclusion of, well, how come it's red in this video after the alleged collision happened, and then it doesn't have any red pieces where it should be red.
So in other words,
I think that's still a confusing point with this jury. This guy, I don't think, really is clear on exactly what was supposed to be red, what wasn't red, what was lit up, what was partly lens. Because we know that, and I left my tail light down in the basement when I was unloading all the crap from the car. But we know that underlying the lens portion was the diffuser. And I think the point that needed to be made, and I'm not so sure based on his explanation that it was all that clear, that it would take more damage, physical damage to the underlying diffuser to prevent it from glowing red. I mean, that's in a nutshell what the difference was. All of their testing did nothing to prevent the diffuser from being a red light. What's your take on this juror's understanding of that whole piece of evidence?
Well, the truth is that jurors just go to what is practical, what seems common sense to them. And if I think this juror didn't get to the diffuser, they just bypassed that. They went, look, the prosecution said he hit her and it broke the taillight. If you got a broken taillight, all of a sudden you see a white light. I didn't see that on the video, and therefore I wasn't sure it was even broken. This is what happens if you are not incredibly clear when you are presenting evidence, here's how this works, then jurors will go to their own common sense explanation, their own basic understanding of here's what I think happened in a case like that. If somebody's got a broken taillight, I'm not going to be seeing the red. And I did see the red here, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's very
I'm with
interesting.
him. I'm actually with him because the side of the light was white, and the back of the light where it was supposed to be broken was red. So I'm kind of like I'm doing my common sense too. I mean, you just told me that it was all broken, all those big pieces were out, and I don't see any big pieces being out either. So I mean, I'm kind of with him, Michael. I disagree.
I think it's a.
We're having a jury discussion, Richard.
It'd be very interesting to get a show of hands of 100 people. How many people actually understand how the taillight works nowadays? Not the good old days when you had a bulb that you stick in there. You put a bulb in there, it's white. The lens is red. Hey, you got a red light. You take that lens off, you have a white bulb, or you got nothing. That's not the way they work anymore. You know, the underlying diffuser determines the color, not the lens. And so I don't think people understand that. They would say lens is gone, should be white. And that's just plain wrong. But that's the common sense theory of how a taillight works. And I tell you, I think the Commonwealth screwed up by not making that clearer because it supports their case. Now, of course, the defense would come back and say, well, yeah, but all of the tested lights never damaged the diffuser. The subject light did have a damage to the diffuser. That tells you somebody was banging the hell out of it with something other than a guy's arm, right? But they never got there because the Commonwealth never made that point clear enough that, yeah, you're seeing red because that's the underlying light. That's not the lens. I think that might have been a whole different analysis by the jury.
Yeah, I mean, but the truth is, this gets to this whole issue because they were focused on that car. They focused on the taillight and how the thing. And I think again, going to sort of that intuitive nature of what do I think happened here is that a lot of people just kind of went, wait a minute, how does he get cuts on his arm from a car hitting him? How does he get blunt force trauma? So they're just, all jurors sit there, and even though they don't have evidence necessarily of exactly how she hit him or what happened there, they're going, how just the pure mechanics. How did this work? How could she have hit him to cause somehow these injuries on his body? And if it just doesn't make sense in terms of, okay, how does his head get hurt? How does he get blunt force trauma that way? I just think they go, I can't see it. I can't see how her even backing up into him or things like that creates that kind of injury.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would have screwed up the jury badly. I would have been all into this light, how it's working, how it doesn't work. They never really cared that much because they didn't see a collision. So
that was the whole case. Collision, no collision, no collision, no collision. The alternate jury said, hey, how many times do you bring a murder charge when the medical examiner says there's no homicide? Okay, no collision. So there you go. It's simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we look at this from the outside and we see it play out either as attorneys or other professionals who have been in the process, we sometimes think too much. We start thinking, are they going to understand this? When you take a couple of steps back and it's just common sense. You're giving them things that make perfect sense that the car did not hit this guy based on the evidence. But, when you're deep into it, you're thinking, what am I missing? What should I explain better? What will they understand? And sometimes you got to take a step back.
Yeah, it's the virtual, you sometimes miss the forest for the trees. And sometimes when we get in the case, it's not just the trees that the attorneys are presenting, but they're on branches and leaves. And the jury's like, wait a minute, I'm way up here on top of the canopy.
Yeah. Yep. No doubt. Okay, let me see what else we got here. Oh, do you have a question there, Linda? While I'm
no. Let's see what Jason is and then we'll get to Paula.
Straw poll. The judge recommended to us in the courtroom that is not a good way to do it. We broke down what we did is we broke down each charge and we went from top to bottom and discussed everything thoroughly and did our best to do right by the Karen Reed and the Commonwealth.
So that was a big issue that I don't think it bothers me as much as it bothers Bob Bianchi. because I think it wasn't a direction regarding their entire deliberation. It was just, here's how I think you should not start. But none of her business. Shut the hell up. Let them do their thing as long as they're not breaking the law and doing it. I just don't know if it had a huge impact one way or the other. What do you think, Richard?
I don't think so. I mean, the jurors, especially when the eyes of the world are watching, they want to be careful. And so the methodology that he articulates that they used is something that a lot of jurors will do. They're like, let's go through the charges. Let's go through the evidence. Let's make sure that we're really comprehending everything that we're looking at here in order to conclusively look at it. It's the first time I've had a chance to actually talk about the case, and they, took their job. These verdicts typically are, in my opinion, better verdicts. I mean, unless there's a case where it's just so obvious that it's not this. I mean, I'll give a quick shout out. Like the A$AP Rocky case. I mean, that was such an obvious case where it was such a bogus case.
Anybody involved in that case there, Richard?
Yeah, it was just
Okay.
a little bit.
Full disclosure.
Richard and Michel picked the jury for that case.
Yeah, so yeah, full disclosure, I worked on that
Full
case.
disclosure, yeah.
So I've got a dog in that fight. And so, but I mean, the truth is that that's a case where I felt, and the jury came back in a single day. So that showed this. But in a case where there's a lot of evidence and they've been there for 4 weeks and they know the world is watching, taking the time, being very thorough is something that is a good thing.
Yeah. What else did Jason say that enlightened us? While you're
Let me see
doing
if I
that,
can queue up
while you're
response.
doing that, before we get to Paul, let me just show this question because it's very interesting. Koya Craig, why can't the FBI get the geofencing of the 34 failure that would include iPhones, which was not done by Michael Proctor, to show John was in the house? So very interesting. We're going to talk about this with Michael Easter because he said that the Commonwealth sent out a lot of preservation letters and never followed up after they decided that Karen Reed was the person they were going to target. And we had Olivia Lambo on the other day, and apparently the Google geofencing was never obtained. Whether they sent out a preservation letter or not, we don't know. But that may have been something that would have been maybe a little bit helpful if you're doing a fair and honest and accurate investigation. So, Koya, great question. Save it for Monday night with Michael Easter.
Okay, so let's see. Let's get one more response from this guy.
You'd have to ask them about it, but in my opinion, I think it was just due to the poor investigation. There's just too many holes, and it's hard to prove that the collision happened. So if there's reasonable doubt that happened, or that there may have been foul play, if there's room for that, then it's hard to come to a guilty verdict.
What happened when the jury initially said they had a verdict and then said, oops, no, we don't, and then 15 minutes later they said, oh, we do? What happened there?
So that actually is kind of interesting. So the envelope, it was sealed and it's locked away. It'll never be looked at. But on everything on that initial slip was the same as the slip that was presented.
But why did they pull it back?
The pulling the back was for the OUI charge.
There was driving under the influence, essentially drunk driving.
Yes, driving under the influence. We in our deliberations, we had decided there was enough evidence and proof that she was driving under the influence. And
So I don't know that I understand still what he's talking about in terms of why they brought it back and focused on the OUI charge, but again, what? Somebody wasn't sure about it. That was an explanation without an explanation.
Yeah, and it's I mean, this is where I think there's a little bit of them protecting each other on this stuff. I mean, jurors get really insular, and they get protective of each other, the process. They know they're going to be scrutinized and stuff like that. And it sounds like they genuinely were being very respectful of each other. My sense is that somebody was a little bit unsure about it and just wanted to make sure, and they wanted to discuss one more issue just to make sure that they felt about this. Because every once in a while there's these reservations. You know, one of the questions I have is on the OUI is, as we all know, sometimes there's negotiation. And if there are jurors on there who go, I still have some questions, I kind of think that she's guilty, like, well, maybe we can just, if we can convict her of this, that gets some message across that you're not getting off scot-free here and here too.
Yeah,
So there's
and I-
that kind of negotiation sometimes does happen.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the defense calculated that risk by putting in that OUI. If somebody's going to convict her of something and this is going to make them feel like they've done their job,
Right.
here it is. And you know, it was jaywalking by comparison. So
Exactly.
especially apparently in that part of the world where everybody drinks and drives. You know, it's you know, and we talked to Michael D., the attorney in Massachusetts, friend of Linda's, who does a lot of those cases. The punishment is not very strong. I mean, you can have up to 4 DUIs, and the maximum in prison never goes up beyond 2.5 years. 4, and it never goes beyond that. And obviously, the first time, second time, it's probation and go to class, like Karen Reed got. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's a societal, cultural thing. Because you know, I'm from California. I guarantee you that don't fly in California.
No, I'm in California too.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Then, yeah, that is. They don't cotton to that. Okay, I have the other juror here. Let's see if I can bring her into the mix. Stand by. Okay.
By the way, Michael, Aiden Carney does the same thing when he's pulling videos in, because to avoid the issue of the copyright, you pull them in and you play them, you know, and he had the same issue that sometimes they don't pull in quickly, and also, but that's
Well,
what
I'm in good
have to
company. The only difference is I won't start cursing.
no potty mouth, huh?
Not he is hands down the winner in that. I'm not close. He's a hoot, that guy, I'll tell you. And he was always very helpful to us. Appeared many times, and you know,
And his charges should be dismissed. I'm
yes,
hoping.
that should be the next step. As Meredith, his girlfriend, said, you know, that should be the next step. On a second here.
I think, by the way, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let's see if I can bring her in here. Back it up just a touch. This, of course, is Ms. Prado, Paula Prado. She was juror number 11.
The weeks passed by. I just realized there was too many holes that we couldn't fill, and there's nothing that put her on the scene, in our opinion, besides just drop John O'Keefe off. And the tail light, the injuries in his arm didn't make much sense that come from the tail light for us. The last witness, Arca, from the defense, that made clear, they did a very good job, like showing us, explaining all the technicalities, of everything. And yeah, we couldn't prove there was a collision and she was responsible for John's death.
Are you convinced she wasn't responsible for his death?
I am convinced. I'm 100% convinced. Yes, I really don't think she was responsible for his death. I think she dropped him off. If she back up fast enough to maybe touch him, maybe, but that was not the reason why he fell his back in a way that the way the cut was, the injury was, and the fracture was. I don't think that was from the car, because otherwise we would see much more injuries over his body.
So, I mean, a lot of very common sense analysis there, Richard. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what always happens in all these cases. Ultimately, they're going, okay, we're out there. What makes sense? If she is guilty, here's the scenario to explain that. She's got to go, obviously, full tilt back into him. They've got a certain speed probably in mind that she's got to back up in terms of doing that. And some of this may be justified by forensic evidence. Some of it may not. But again, it's the common sense view to say, if she is going to be guilty of doing this, they've got, I think, their own vision in mind of how it probably should have occurred if she did it that way, which has to do with vehicle speed, it has to do with the point of impact, it has to do with the damage was the vehicle, it has to do with what kind of injuries you see on his body. And I think they're just sitting there going, we just can't match these injuries. What's looking like in this taillight with what happened here. Didn't make sense.
Yeah, and the alternate juror that DePetro interviewed, that he's taken it down now, said basically the same thing. He said, I want to know, and he called him John, how many times do you have a murder case where the medical examiner says there was no impact and there's no homicide? So, I mean, right from the get-go, Dr. Scortibello, who was, I forget who liked her as one of the main witnesses, like Dr. Scortibello as one of the main witnesses with regard to that. And they couldn't, and those scratches on the arm, right? Those abrasions on the arm.
So, I mean, this is, what's very interesting, and this is obviously strategy that we work with all the time. Linda knows about this, is that you're always looking for what can I take in the prosecution's case when you're working on the defense to say even their own evidence disproves this crime here. And that's a perfect example of saying, wait a minute, this is their guy. This is their medical exam, even though ostensibly he's supposed to be objective in it. Or here's at least a neutral third party who doesn't have a dog in this fight, who says, I can't say there was an impact there. That's a huge piece. And I know they haven't talked that much about it, but it's a very important piece. If your own medical examiner says, I can't confirm that this was a homicide based on this vehicle impact, then that's ostensibly, I think jurors see the medical examiner as prosecution's guy. And if he doesn't say that, then I think jurors are like, well, what are we talking about? We just have to take the prosecutor's word for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, Aiden Carney had a hysterical rant last night because when you get to this, you're going to find that she basically said, without actually attacking him, that the constant objections from the prosecution, especially during Dr. Marie Russell's testimony, the dog bite ER physician, were just too much. And then because they want to hear the truth, I guess, and that the witnesses he was going on about how the witnesses the prosecution called actually proved the case for the defense. They didn't like Yuri Buchanan. They thought he was clenching fists of lying. They liked Dr. Wolfers apparently because they didn't think he had a dog in the fight. And Dr. La Posada didn't think he had a dog in the fight. So he was going on and on. It's actually kind of funny listening to him saying, "You did this, Hank. It's your witnesses that proved the case for the defense."
Yeah. And he graphically compared Adam Lawley's efforts from the first time, who he lost in that it was a hung jury, but he got closer to winning than Hank Brennan did. Okay, let's listen to a little bit more of this juror. Let's see if I can get that. Where did that go? I've lost her.
How could you lose her? She's fabulous. She's an attorney in Brazil.
Back up and touch him somehow. Maybe he lost his shoes in this movement and got upset, and then she left and she didn't saw him. And so either he got out of her way or something, and maybe he lost his shoes in this process. But in my opinion, he definitely went inside and something happened inside the house.
Paula, you were getting emotional. What was going through your heart and mind after making that, tremendous decision?
Yeah, so I was happy for Karen Reed and her family. Of course, I think justice was served, but see John Lucky's family leaving the courthouse melt my heart. I'm a mother, and I saw her pain through all those days. And I just want to tell them it's not our fault that Karen Reed is not convicted, even if there's any chance she's guilty of something, of hurt him somehow. The Commonwealth and the investigators didn't do their jobs to prove that to us. So we couldn't charge her with anything. And I really, really hope there is a way for the case to be reopened and they can investigate again and find who actually did that to John.
But you were emotional at the end.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It was because I was sad for the family, because I feel like great for Karen Reed, but horrible for the family. He seemed to be a very nice guy, the story with his nephews and niece, and was alive. So I feel bad for them, and I really want them to get justice for John O'Keefe for real.
Was it a poor investigation?
In my opinion, yes. Too many flaws, too many holes that we couldn't fill in. No reports, so many things, videos with glitch. I don't know, felt a little not correct, not precise. I mean, they are police officers. They know what to do in investigation, and with too many pieces were missing.
Well, you said you were first thinking manslaughter in the beginning. What changed your mind to not guilty?
The process, like what as they show us that things don't connect to each other. The injuries don't connect with the tail light, the glitch on the video of the sailport, the missing part of the video of the ring light in John O'Keefe's house was too many coincidences to be, straight her fault.
So the first trial.
So I think that's very interesting. She's faulting not just the investigation, but she's making it sound like, maybe there was some shenanigans going on, not just a bad investigation, but missing video from the Sally port and the inverted video, all of those things. So she's not saying that that's what it was, but clearly it made an impression on her.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the truth is, I think, we talked about this last time, they made a wise decision to not go too hard about this big kind of, department-wide conspiracy on this and stuff. But as you'll see, jurors will go there themselves and they will do it. Even if she's not articulating, I think there's a big cover-up and things like that. For the most part, the point is made. Boy, you have an important investigation. Wouldn't you expect this to happen? Wouldn't you expect this to happen? That didn't happen. This report's missing. What's that all about? The truth is that when jurors come in with a case like this, it is very high profile. The standard gets raised pretty high for the prosecution and for the police investigation. So this may have been a standard investigation, but the truth is that when jurors come into a case like this, they expect, boy, you're going to be bringing these charges and this is a big deal for you. You better bring the goods.
Yeah. And Richard, when she finished in all her interviews, she wanted to make it clear that she, like Jason, juror number 4, juror number 11, Paula, believe that Karen Reed is 100% innocent, not just not guilty, not just not proven, 100% innocent. And I think also the alternate who didn't get on felt that way also. I haven't listened to the new juror number 12, obviously, but they all felt that not just not guilty, 100% innocent. Richard.
Right, right. But and here's what I think they make the distinction is like, if you can't prove a collision even happened, then she's 100% innocent. I mean, the truth is that there's a distinction here, I think, between, the injuries could have been consistent, but they didn't bring in this evidence. They didn't bring in this evidence. We hear that from jurors all the time. That's why we couldn't get beyond a reasonable doubt on this. But the truth is there were so many holes here that actually created that actual link between her and actually hitting him and causing this, that I think they went. And I think, let's face it, I think a lot of them do believe something happened in that house. She alluded to it. And I think they went, that's the only explanation that can come with it. If there's no collision, what happened?
What happened?
Something happened in that house.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that's a clear distinction between the first jury, which went down the rabbit hole about the conspiracy, and because they couldn't figure out what happened, they're trying to figure it out. They were hung. They had some people that just weren't going to bend on that. She did two things I think were very interesting. First of all, your take on how emotional she was, and she explains it was because, yes, Karen Reed is now free, but no justice for Officer John O'Keefe.
Right.
She was emotional about that.
It is very emotional. First of all, they are so heavily invested in this, and they know it's, there's so much pressure on jurors in these cases, and they understand the world is watching them. They have a very heavy duty in terms of what the job is. So the emotion has been built up over this entire trial. So she's just emotional in general. They're also very clearly aware that whatever verdict they give is going to send a message. And it's going to send the other side. And to a certain extent, they understand. They convict her, boy, they're telling Karen Reed to her face, you're going away for a long time. That's a heavy burden. But they also are aware, we're going to set you free. They see the family there all the time. They feel responsible for the family's reaction to that. And that's a heavy burden too. So I think that's what's driving the emotion.
So the prosecution, in my opinion, made a mistake then not calling all the other witnesses, but I did watch a little bit of the clips of the Dateline interview with McCabe's, and you have the father and Albert's, right? But the cop, Brian Albert, said what was he supposed to do? Come out in his underwear? And that was like, it was shocking to me. So I gather that the prosecution wouldn't have done well by calling those witnesses. Is that, you think that was
They clearly, I think, made a determination about this, and they said, "Look, this is not going to help our case." I think they've talked to those witnesses, and then it's a rock and a hard place kind of situation where you're like, "Okay, what do I do here? If I leave this?" And I think they just erred on the side of, if this guy gets called to the stand, that he's going to be poisonous and he's going to hurt my case.
Yeah, I mean, Jen McCabe was the culmination of the unlikableness, but each of them is unlikable in their own way and degree. And anybody who watched parts of those, I couldn't watch most of it because it's just disgusting. Their take on this and their feeling that they've been wronged. It's just, it's so unbelievable that it's arrogant. There's no class. They're just, I don't know. They're different folks. Well,
speaking about no class, let's end Richard with this. After, of course, we give Joey Kane a shout out. Joey always does a lot of videos for us. He gifted 2 Justice Serve TV memberships. And by the way, we would like to hear from some of the jurors. Disney Nerdity 5. I backed your comment up to Twitter today to this juror. Crossing my fingers, she sees us in her comments. All right, but let's give a shout out to this juror, because the best comment I thought she made, and it wasn't in this interview, before we let you go, Richard, I want your take, was on Ms. Dever. Don't say Dever, don't say Devers, the officer from Boston, the Boston Cop, right, who then accused Jackson of planting false memories in her. She said her testimony made her concerned about whether it's safe for her to be carrying a gun in public among citizens of the United States, that she may need a psychological evaluation, I think was the implication. When I want to throw that out, and I want to throw one other thing out at you and get your reaction. Apparently, there was, according to Turtle Boy last night, there was a complaint from one of the female jurors that the real reason why Paul O'Keefe's seat was moved is because one of the jurors felt uncomfortable, a female juror, about how he was staring at her. Once you have those two type of things, whether it be from the same juror, from different jurors, is there any way the prosecution could have gotten beyond that and gotten any type of verdict in their favor?
It's too hard. I just think the problem is that the optics in this case, and the problem is that they walked into a case with a lot of problems. Everybody was aware of it. Everybody was aware of the hung jury the first time, so they're obviously aware that, first of all, that there's a lot of jurors that already had a reasonable doubt about this case. So that their awareness, and yes, I hear they're carrying the case for the first time and stuff like that. But then you have all the personality dynamics, and you have obviously very good defense lawyers on this side who are raising all these issues. And you do have serious investigation problems on this case. And you have difficulty. You have a very problematic. So I just think it's an uphill battle all the way. And you play into that with really problematic personalities on the prosecution side, and it just kind of all goes in. So it's, there are cases that I've handled on the defense side where you are threading the needle. You just got a bunch of bad facts in your case, and you're just trying to do whatever you can to try and thread the needle. But sometimes it's a real uphill battle, and that's what I think they had. If they were going to get a conviction in this case, I think they would have had to do some serious jury focus groups to really figure out, how do you tailor this in a very specific way, in a quick way, just to do it and narrow it down.
So, Richard, we want to thank you for your time here, because I know an hour on a Friday. We're Friday. You're coming into a night. On it's the first day of spring, or just about the first day of spring. The longest day of the year. Your expertise is terrific, and can we call on you again as more jurors speak?
Of course, I'd love to. I always love hearing from the jurors, because again, it's like a focus group after the fact, and you get to figure out really what happened there and what was their thought process. And that's endlessly fascinating.
And there are a couple other cases that I definitely want to get into with you, maybe after the next one is done. But the Weinstein jury, they had nightmare issues going on there. Threats between the jury members. And then, of course, the Diddy case, they just lost the juror, or did they lose two?
They only lost one, I think.
They lost one. So, I mean, these are, we look at the Karen Reed jury and we're shocked because they had 18 going in, including alternates, and they had 18 when they got done. And now here you have these other cases, one federal, one state, where all kinds of craziness was going on. So I definitely want to get you back on and we can talk about those things. So.
Lots to talk about.
Yes, you're going to be busy.
Well, as always, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I always love coming on the show. You guys are fantastic, and I love talking to you.
Appreciate that, sir. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Now I've held off because I didn't want to do too much here. By the way, allegedly maybe Linda looking fly on her JSTV shirt. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
There it is. You actually can't see them, but I'm wearing
the yoga pants coming back, or
no?
these are
the loose. They're not even sweats. They're loose. They're for summertime.
What are they called? Do they have a name? Those kind of pants?
Loose, wide leg pants. Just wide leg pants. So I'm actually outfitted in Just to Serve TV today.
Yes.
Like the shirt, but yes, I'm up in the country, outfitted in JSTV. Making our pitch to get some jurors on here. 16,000 of you now, strong and subscribers. Went up another 1,000 this week. But what I didn't say is please hit that subscribe, like, share, and notify button yet.
So next Monday, we'll have Michael Easter back on, and we'll talk about some of these jurors' comments. They seem to be, without exception, thinking the investigation stunk. So whether that manifested itself as maybe that was part of a bigger conspiracy that we aren't really charged with figuring out, or maybe it was just like both these jurors used the same phrase: too many holes, right?
Right.
So we can talk to Michael Easter about that. We know what his opinion has been, but in retrospect, it'll be interesting to see his reaction to these juror statements. So then, what else is going on? We have to reconvene and kind of figure out what the steps are.
Yeah, we do want to have sometime next week a Karen Reed Lollapalooza with all the people that have
bring some of the local folks on, Gadina and
Scott and Jason Grant. All the people had started this, and all the people that have you've been listening to at Just to Serve TV for the last 8 weeks have given the time. So I've already branded it a Lollapalooza. I mean, we may want to brand it something else, but I don't think this case is going to go away for a week because we're going to hear from more jurors. There'll be another couple this week, and by the time we get to Monday, and Disney Nerd, by the way, is noting that we noted that it was Fashion Friday, and there are new products in the JSTV merch store, including some. I'm our biggest customer. I just bought like a lot of new products, to be able to wear on the air. But and I want to get off because I know there's some other streams that you all want to hear from people on. I believe Ian Runkle has David Nettie and
Alessi and Mr.
Alessi on tonight.
Yeah.
So we know
I think that's now or 7:30, but yeah, it's coming up. Definitely want to check that out, see what they got to say, and then
check that out. And of course,
at some point, I'm sure Alan Jackson will speak. Anyway. I just don't know where. Okay, so so we'll have a good weekend, partner. And until Monday, folks, I'm Michael Bryant, trying to do the right thing.
And I'm Linda Kenny-Bodden. Before you go, hit the subscribe, share, like, and notify button. We'll see you Monday at 6.
Sun